In today's video, we're going to be looking at the gaming performance offered by the new M4 Mac Mini with 16 gig of RAM. Please check out my second channel, Mr. Mac Right Plus, where I'm uploading even more M4 Mac Mini tests throughout next week. Link in description. Our first game to look at is Death Stranding by Kojima. I first tried the game at 1080p, very high graphics quality, with metal effects on temporal and quality mode. Walking from Way Station west of Capital Knot City to Distribution Center west of Capital Knot City is 50 to 70 FPS. During BT encounters, the FPS can drop down to around 50 FPS. This is a very early on encounter with them, so it might be different later on in the game. This early cutscene isn't too challenging as well, so it's typically over 60 FPS even towards the end when BTs appear. I consider this pretty good results. I know it's not native 1080p, but metal effects temporal isn't very noticeable in this game with the upscaling and the ghosting, especially at quality mode. During my 20 minutes of playtime at these settings, the game reached a max outside surface temperature of 38.1 degrees. I then tried the game at 1080p, medium graphics quality, with metal effects off. We see similar results in terms of FPS. Walking from Way Station west of Capital Knot City to Distribution Center west of Capital Knot City is 50 to 70 FPS. During BT encounters, the FPS can drop down to around 40 FPS. This early cutscene, it starts out at like 60 FPS or so, however, towards the end, when the BTs appear, it does go into the low 50s. I prefer playing it very high with metal effects personally. During my 20 minutes of playtime at these settings, the game reached a max outside surface temperature of 37 degrees. It's also worth noting that screen tearing is pretty noticeable in this game, so if you can enable VSync, I recommend it. I didn't in this video just because I wanted to see the uncapped FPS. Like most of these big AAA games, metal effects is going to make a big difference, so I strongly recommend using it if you want to get around 60 FPS on this machine. Chess. Here I am playing on the metal board. I tested the game for 15 minutes, and I'm happy to report the game is locked to 60 on this M4 Mac Mini. Very good results.
On F2 to F3.
The next game to look at is Layers of Fear by Blooper Team. Recently, the game was updated to support ray tracing for both M3 and M4 Max. It's one of the only games updated for M4 right now, and also with support for ray tracing. Anyway, I'm trying the game at 1080p high with metal effects on quality. With ray tracing on, honestly, we're not seeing a huge difference in performance with it off. This Unreal Engine 5 Mac port wasn't the best optimized to begin with. Look, it's not awful, but it's not great. It's acceptable. The truth is, ray tracing in this game isn't very noticeable, and I'd just recommend leaving it off for a tiny bit more performance. This isn't a very good example of ray tracing on Mac, where you need like Control or Cyberpunk to really show this off. I think this game is more being used as a buzzword by Apple and Blooper to promote M3 and M4 hardware for ray tracing, but it's not a good example. At least ray tracing here is better than Cyan's Mist and Firmament. What is happening? What is happening here? It's like I'm playing the original Mist. Help me! Help me, please! Oh my god! Moving on, we have Grid Legends by Feral Interactive. This game isn't terribly demanding, and we know that as well because Feral are also bringing it to iPhone and iPad in December. Even an iPhone 12 Pro will be able to play this game, which is pretty crazy. Anyway, on Windows PC and Mac, Grid Legends has an in-game benchmark tool. We can use this to see results. I first tried the game at 1440p, high preset, with anti-aliasing on TAA plus Metal Effects Spatial. Metal Effects Spatial typically sucks, but Feral have used the original game's existing deeply integrated temporal anti-aliasing solution to pre-process frames prior to Metal Effects Spatial upscaling, so it looks good. Anyway, at these settings, the game sees 56 FPS on average, a min FPS of 45, and a max FPS of 72. I then tried the game at 1080p, high preset, with anti-aliasing on TAA. At these settings, the game sees 63 FPS on average, a min FPS of 50, and a max FPS of 88. So honestly, pretty damn good. After all these results, we can truly see with this game that it runs like a dream here, but to be honest, it runs very well on all Macs that it supports. Here we have Resident Evil 4 by Capcom. I first tried the game at 1080p, prioritized graphics preset, with Metal Effects on quality. One thing I want to say with these RE games is that Metal Effects isn't very good here. The game is really good though, so I can usually just forget about it, but the ghosting with Leon's hair can be quite noticeable. Anyway, the game typically gets over 60 FPS at these settings. Chapter 2 in the Valley, it rarely went below 60 FPS. In Chapter 3, in the fish farm, I was expecting the FPS to tank dramatically here, as it does on most Apple devices, but it did pretty well. Well, it tanks heavily on low-end Mac hardware. What else? Because this scene usually uses a great deal of the GPU, but yeah, it only goes a little bit below 60. In Chapter 10, in the Ant Chamber, is that what you call it? We see similar results. I would suggest enabling VSync at these settings, as it will provide a much smoother experience and also enable 60 FPS as a frame rate cap. This will eliminate screen tearing. I just wanted to see the uncapped FPS. One issue I'm facing, and it's the same story on all Apple devices, is with sniping. When you snipe, the FPS drops quite a bit. It's really annoying for me, as it makes getting headshots a little bit awkward. During my 10 minutes of playtime at these settings, the game reached a max outside surface temperature of 37.1 degrees. I then tried the game at 1080p, balance preset, with Metal Effects off. It's not outstanding performance, but for a tiny Mac Mini, it's pretty good results. Although Metal Effects is definitely a requirement for this title in order to get around 60 FPS at 1080p. It's a shame, as I said, Metal Effects makes the image quality quite a bit worse here. But maybe you can be like me and sometimes ignore it because you're having so much fun shooting zombies in the head. Also, during my 10 minutes of playtime at these settings, the game reached a max outside surface temperature of 38.5 degrees. Here is another Capcom title, Resident Evil 7. I chose this one over Village as it's a good example of how M4 Mac Mini is a beast for playing older AAA games at high resolutions. For example, here is the game running at 1440p max graphics with Metal Effects on quality. Walking through the forest at the start of the game is 60 plus FPS. Fighting Jack in the garage is 60 plus FPS. However, the good frame rate didn't stop me from dying from his annoying car. I always gosh dang die from it. The chainsaw boss battle is perfect. Exploring the yard outside, the FPS is fine. And finally, using the flamethrower, I still could not get the FPS to go below 60. During my 12 minutes of playtime at these settings, the game reached the max outside surface temperature of 39.0 degrees. But what about native 1080p and max graphics, so like no metal effects is being used? We see similar results. The game never went below 60. As I previously said though, this is a pretty old game now, so it's important to not hype up the performance here. These results are what we should be expecting from something like this, and it's what I'd like to see from an entry-level Mac for the general user, and it hits all those targets. Moving on, we have Lies of P by NeoWiz. This is the game running at 1080p high with metal effects on balanced. Is it called Elysian? Elysian Boulevard, it's typically over 60 FPS. However, on the odd occasion, it can drop below this target. But it's nothing game-breaking. I don't know, that's up to personal opinion. In Cracked City Hall, we see similar results. For better performance, it might be a good option to cap the FPS to 60. I do have VSync enabled here, but a 60 FPS cap might make it a smoother experience because the frame rate won't be going up and down so much. I just wanted to see what the FPS is like uncapped. During my 6 minutes of playtime at these settings, the game reached a max outside surface temperature of 38.5 degrees. I also tried the game at 1080p medium with metal effects off. I was hoping this would always provide over 60 FPS at native 1080p, but this is not the case. It looks like metal effects, along with a lot of these games, is a requirement to hit that 60 FPS target and decent settings at 1080p. No bother, metal effects in this game is very good, especially at higher settings. I think it uses temporal upscaling, and that's excellent, so don't be afraid to use it. During my 6 minutes of playtime at these settings, the game reached a max outside surface temperature of 38.5 degrees again. Now, for one of the most popular Mac games, Baldur's Gate 3. To begin with, this port, it's great it's here. This is like one of the biggest games right now, even now. But this port is not very good. It runs on an older version of Metal 2.1, and uses AMD FSR 1.0 and uses it very poorly. It does not support AMD FSR 2.0, unlike Windows PC, which is very annoying. FSR 1.0 here causes major ghosting no matter what option you go for within the FSR settings. So I strongly recommend just not using it altogether for much better image quality. Anyway, this is 1080p medium, and it typically provides a bit over 30 FPS. It's playable, yeah, but in the future, I would really like if this game could be playable more at like high or epic settings to really enjoy the great graphics here. But this is a very graphically demanding game. I hope Larian can consider updating the game to use AMD FSR 2.0 or metal effects in the future. I know that I spoke with Elverels last year, and they said that they were looking into Metal 3 and metal effects, but I haven't seen an update on that, and Elverels no longer work with Larian, so we don't know. I don't know what's going on. But these tools just might help with the performance. During my 26 minutes of playtime with this game, it reached a max outside surface temperature of 35.9 degrees. I have no idea what the heck to do in this game. I don't know what's going on. So my performance results here are not entirely accurate. I just got these random saves off the internet and played them. What I will say is that I've seen some Mac gamers say that the Mac port is worse visually compared to current gen systems and Windows PC, although I can't really confirm this or talk much on it because I just don't know, and honestly, I don't really care. Anyway, here is the game running at 1080p, high preset with metal effects, temporal and quality mode. Exploring this colorful planet is about 60 FPS and it can go lower than this at times. This planet here provides 60 plus FPS, and flying over this absolutely massive planet and fighting these baddies in the ships is 100 plus FPS. During my 9 minutes of playtime with this game at these settings, it reached a max outside surface temperature of 35.6 degrees. Moving on, here is the game running at 1080p, enhanced preset, with metal effects off, and I'm using FXAA. Exploring this lovely planet is 60 plus FPS, same with this one, but it's daytime now, but I don't think that matters. And fighting baddies in space here is well over 100 FPS. So yeah, for me, good results, but you guys probably will have a better opinion on that. It's also worth noting the game did crash when loading a save at these settings, but not a big issue. It happens to the best of us, and it only happened once. SnowRunner by Saber Interactive. I honestly always forget this is on Mac, and then I come around to making these videos. I'm like, oh, SnowRunner. You got to talk about that. What's hidden about this port is that it supports metal effects in the background. It's kind of strange that it doesn't support it. You can't change it in game. Kind of weird, but oh well. Anyway, the performance is okay. This is 1080p high, and it gets about 40 to 60 plus FPS. It's not really an issue with the fluctuating FPS, maybe. I didn't really notice it because, I don't know, this game, it doesn't require a super high FPS to be enjoyed. It's just a nice action game where you drive things, and it's really, really fun, actually. It's really addicting. If you want closer to 60 FPS, always, kinda, then you should try playing at medium settings at 1080p. Honestly, the game, I can't really tell much of a difference between medium and what was I playing it before? High. So, both of these options are a good way to experience the game. You can go for high for the visuals, if you can tell the difference, or you can go for medium for the higher FPS. Okay, our last game to look at is Total War, Warhammer 3. So yes, this is an older AAA release by Feral, but it remains one of the most demanding PC titles to try on Mac. It uses some old tech too, like Metal 2.4 and AMD FSR 1.0. Anyway, since it has an in-game benchmark tool, why not use it? It's there, so let's use it. What results do we get at 1080p high? In the battle benchmark, we see 29.7 FPS, and in the campaign benchmark, 26.3 FPS. Honestly, for me, not bad results for this little Mac Mini. If I wanted a high FPS, I could put the settings to medium. This means in battle I now see 46.7 FPS, and campaign 37.0. And then if I want closer to 60 FPS at 1080p medium, I found it was good to put AMD FSR to 81%. In battle, I now see 62.9 FPS and campaign 46.1. It's also worth noting that at these settings, when I loaded the campaign benchmark for the first time, the game crashed. Again, these things happen. It's not much of an issue. I left Feral a nice note for some feedback about this, and I love these guys because they literally, I speak to them quite often, and they read all of their reviews, and they always update their games for new hardware. So yeah, I love those guys. I'm just going to recommend this from now on. This is pretty good. It's good, it's okay, it does the job. Please check out my second channel, Mr. Mac Right Plus,